Ever since Kaneki dropped into Dead by Daylight, things just haven't been the same, not by a long shot. Even after the most anticipated killer ever hit live, people still haven't entirely let up on playing him. While Springtrap may sit at a pretty hefty 20% pick rate, Kaneki still has a decently high 6.5%, taking the place as the second most popular killer in the game right now. That's kinda crazy. Most of the time, new killers tend to drop their pick rate pretty significantly whenever they no longer become the thing. People will most likely go back to whatever killer they were maining before, survivor mains will go back to playing the role they enjoy, and the people that like the new killer will still play the new killer, but might throw in a few other killers in their rotation. For example, Houndmaster, the killer that came out right before Kaneki, has dropped to a 1.5% pick rate, which is probably, if I were to guess, where she's gonna stay. That's not terrible by any means, considering that she's a decently strong killer and accessible to most people, even with her numerous bugs, which are definitely still there. Trust me, I played her recently, she's still a buggy mess. A 1.5% pick rate is kind of at the lower end of the middle, with a large chunk of killers being around that area. So what's happening with Kaneki? What's the main cause of this Kaneki fever we find ourselves in, even after Springtrap himself dropped into the game? Well, that's what I'm going to try to unpack today. Why is Kaneki so played? Why is he so hated by a large group of people? And do I actually think all of this is a problem with any merit? Everybody, take a seat and grab some snacks. We're going to spend some time talking about Dead by Daylight's Kaneki problem. Just in case you don't remember, I made a video a little while ago when Kaneki released covering my general thoughts about him. While I stated that I really liked his power and design, I took issue with a few things that felt particularly unfair for the most part. Mainly my problems with how aggressive his lock-on feature was, how quick his recovery was after using his power, and how easy it was to stomp pretty much anyone in a chase. After all this time, have those issues been fixed? Well, his lock-on feature was reduced pretty significantly, giving him more control over where he chooses to grab, so that's cool. That's a nice quality of life change. It makes it a lot less frustrating for the survivors too. He now also loses another leap token when breaking a pallet, making it harder for him to catch up to the survivors, assuming he isn't already on cooldown. But that's about it as far as I know. These changes are a step in the right direction. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to take a step back and talk about why so many people are playing Kaneki to begin with. Him having such a high pick rate even after he settled into the game is something I consider to be very interesting, but makes a lot of sense when you really think about it. There are four main reasons I can think of for why people choose to play Ghoul over the large roster of killers, and why his pick rate stands out so much, because it really does. If you take a look at Nightlight, it's pretty crazy just how high his pick rate tends to be over everyone else, and obviously Springtrap's is pretty high because Springtrap is the new killer, and Five Nights at Freddy's has been a huge franchise that people have wanted in the game for a long time, so that's obviously gonna be high, but Kaneki's been in the game for a while, so what's happening there? So let's dive into each reason and determine why he stands out so much in the grand scheme of the game. I feel like it'd be disingenuous if I didn't talk about this part of it, so here we go. Tokyo Ghoul, the license not the killer, happens to have one of the best-selling manga series of all time, and also got an anime after that fact. Look, I'm not here to talk about this in depth. The point I'm trying to consider is that the license itself happens to be extremely popular, and it wouldn't surprise me if that also played a big part in why so many people play Kaneki. Is that the only reason? No, absolutely not, but I figured it was worth mentioning because if I didn't, people would definitely bring it up. I don't know a lot about the license, I don't know what the deal is, I've never watched or read Tokyo Ghoul, but I know a lot of people really like it, and I was kind of surprised just to see how big of a franchise it was going to be for Dead by Daylight. So I feel like I'd be shooting myself in the foot if I didn't bring it up in this, in this video at least. We've seen this happen with a few other killers, as it's just generally a big selling point for Dead by Daylight. For some franchises, it's the only game out there where you can play as your favorite characters, so that happens to be a big part of its identity. That transfers over to Tokyo Ghoul too. Again, this might be a big part of it, so I felt like it was important to bring up. Yeah, there's no surprise here. I genuinely believe Kaneki is one of the most fun killers to pick from in the entire game. While different groups of people will find different stuff fun, the majority of people enjoy fast-paced things, and Kaneki definitely scratches that itch for a lot of players. Playing Kaneki feels like an adrenaline high that never stops, and it's no wonder why he feels that way. You're constantly launching across the map at Mach speed, and due to his short cooldown, there isn't a lot of downtime there. When pressuring the generators, it takes barely any time at all to move across the map quickly, making it really easy to patrol, even if the generators are decently far away from each other. This, as the killer, feels absolutely great. You aren't getting screwed by map size nearly as much as some other killers are, as the ability to launch across the map quickly makes it easy to pressure survivors away from the objective and apply pressure in whatever way you really want to, either by chasing the survivors or kicking the generators. It doesn't just help in terms of pressuring generators though. Kaneki can also prevent a lot of holding W by the survivors and cuts down a lot of time in chase by closing large gaps of distance with not a lot of effort. This is a double-edged sword that we'll get into later. Regardless, it feels great to cut down a lot of that distance and pressure survivors non-stop. He's a ton of fun for that reason. On top of that, the fact that he's constantly injuring survivors and putting them into deep wound makes it feel like he's consistently doing something, which leads him to feeling incredibly rewarding. That dopamine hit of watching many survivors get injured quickly can make it feel like there's a lot happening quickly, and even if you don't end up following through with hooks or downs, it rarely feels as punishing as the same thing happening but with every survivor healthy, if that makes any sense. It rarely feels like the game is going at a slow pace, and that's a big part of why people play him. He's just consistently moving around, going from place to place, pressuring survivors, pressuring generators, and for a lot of people that feels really rewarding because there are a ton of killers that are kind of slow paced and boring. Kaneki's fun factor is almost entirely matched by how not easy per se, but accessible he happens to be. From a mechanical standpoint, there isn't much about Kaneki that's super complex. Hit a survivor, use a leap to catch up. If you're not in a chase, use the leap to get across the map and find someone. That's kind of it. The only thing I would consider to be a little complicated is understanding how his enraged mode works, but even that's just a quick read to fully grasp. He's no Vecna. This tends to work in his favor quite a bit though. Complicated killers just tend to be a lot harder for the majority of people to grasp. That's not to say they're stupid or anything crazy like that, but why would a large group of people learn such a complicated killer if there's an easier killer out there who is even stronger, you know? A lot of people are drawn to Kaneki because there isn't an extreme skill floor. You just have to play for a minute or two and you kind of understand how he works for the most part. There are some things that take a bit of time to fully master, as there are for a large chunk of killers, but most of the time every match is gonna feel fairly simple. Combine this with the fact that he's insanely fun and you have a killer that's nearly as easy to learn as he is fun to play, and that's a pretty appealing combination for most people. Honestly, he's kind of got a similar vibe that Wesker does, where he's easy to pick up and play, but there's a bit of stuff you can learn after the fact that makes him more interesting in many different ways. This is all to say Kaneki is pretty simple, and while some of you may think that's a knock on his design, it's really not. It's pretty clear that that was Behavior's intention when making him. And that isn't a bad thing at all. I don't think there's anything wrong with having some killers that are more on the simple end, and I think having killers that, range in terms of how complicated they are is a good thing. You want that variety because it makes people have an easier time, finding certain killers that fit their niche and fit their playstyle, and then maybe they'll branch out and try other killers. So that's not a bad thing at all. I think it's mostly a good thing, but that's definitely a determining factor in why so many people are drawn to Kaneki, because he just isn't that hard to learn. If being fun and easy wasn't enough, it also doesn't help that Kaneki happens to be incredibly strong too. We've already talked about how great he is at closing large gaps of distance, as well as how easy it is to keep survivors in deep wound and injured health states the entire game. Both of those factors definitely add up, making Kaneki pretty consistent in terms of strength. In addition, his movement ability is also great for snowballing, especially for survivors that are exposed or just generally outpositioned. You can run perks like Infectious and Force Hesitation and really keep survivors on their toes for a large chunk of the game. Combine this with his pretty quick cooldown after canceling a leap, and he can be on your ass in an instant. You better hope you're next to a pallet, because if you're in a dead zone, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get hit, and there isn't a lot you can do about that. Well, you can say this about every single killer in Dead by Daylight. Kaneki's ability to catch up so quickly after you drop a pallet or, try to get away from a loop makes it so if there isn't a loop right next to the one you were just at, it can be very frustrating. Again, they did nerf him in that regard, so it's a lot less annoying than it was before, but that's just one problem he has. There is another problem you can point to as to why Kaneki can feel really frustrating to play against, and that happens to be his vaulting mechanic. When using Kaneki's leap, you can latch onto something or someone past a pallet or window and quickly vault over it, preventing a lot of the downside you get from a survivor dropping a pallet right in your face without, actually stunning you. The recovery is pretty damn quick too. After vaulting a pallet or window, it only takes like 3 seconds to be able to hit the survivor again, which means if the loop is long enough, you're gonna be able to hit them before they can get back around to the pallet. So there isn't a lot the survivors can really do to prevent a hit. And this might sound hypocritical from someone who really likes Vecna and doesn't really hate killers who can deal with god pallets really well, but I think slowing the survivor down if you latch onto them specifically and recovering so quick as well as keeping your momentum makes this so frustrating. Vecna at least has to slow down to cast Mage Hand, and there's always the possibility that the survivors have the interlude sloper effect, but at the same time, Kaneki also loses his stacks, so I don't really know. I think the fact that it works on both palettes and windows is what makes it so frustrating to go against. Kaneki's power doesn't really have the hefty cooldown that Mage Hand has, so you could point to that too if you really wanted to. Plus the fact that for some reason, vaulting over a window with his power also activates Bamboozle. I don't know who thought that was okay, but it definitely makes him more annoying to go against. Bamboozle is already a pretty brain dead perk, but having it activate with Kaneki's leap just adds to the bullshittery people already complain about with him. Needless to say, his strength definitely adds to the reasons people complain about him. I don't think he's the strongest killer in the world. I feel like people complain a little too much, but I definitely see where those complaints are coming from. Don't get me wrong. These reasons piled onto each other definitely give you a good idea as to why people are playing Kaneki so much, and I can't really blame them. I do genuinely enjoy playing him, and that non-stop adrenaline rush is really nice compared to some other killers that have slower paced gameplay. He cuts out a lot of that more boring side of DBD, and I think that's a big driving factor for a lot of people. He's simply just rewarding, so why are people complaining about him? Well, I think the biggest contribution is the fact that he's so abundant in a lot of games. We're seeing the whole Wesker thing all over again, where people are starting to complain about the killer for the main reason that they're seeing him all the time. So does that mean people are complaining about absolutely nothing? No, not at all. I don't think so. There's certainly some things in Kaneki's kit that are frustrating to go against. His vaulting ability is definitely aggravating to phase, and I struggle to find a reason as to why it even exists. Kaneki doesn't really need the extra help, and giving him an ability like this just adds on to a pretty strong killer already. If his cooldowns were a bit longer, it would be fine, but all of Kaneki's cooldowns are like only a couple seconds, and his movement speed really isn't penalized long enough for that sort of thing. This makes it so he's quickly vaulting over a pallet or window and hitting you a few seconds later, and thanks to his ability to body block after the fact, it gives the survivors no real options other than to just hope they have a sliver of enough time to get back to whatever they needed to do. Combine this with Bamboozle, and of course people are gonna get pissed. Why wouldn't they? Moving on from that, his ability to get free injuries at almost no real cost and latching onto survivors even through walls sometimes makes him feel even worse to face. Luckily, it isn't as aggressive as it used to be, but I can still see why people find this incredibly annoying. Even as someone who doesn't hate giving free hits, you know, the free first hit at least, it certainly doesn't feel fun, and if we've learned anything from Legion and Plague, people really don't find being injured all game enjoyable. This and his ability to cut down a lot of distance can make the survivors feel like they have no real options and are constantly playing catch up because the entire team is injured all game. While this is fine and expected from some killers, the fact that Kaneki is still new and people haven't really figured out the best strategy to go against him, people are gonna get mad. There's a good amount of numbers for his cooldowns and other things that I think are just slightly overtuned, and I feel like if they were reduced even just a little bit, people would have a harder time finding an issue with him. I personally have had a ton of games where I loop a Kaneki player for a long time, but it never feels like I'm playing well. It feels more like the killer isn't, if that makes any sense. Same problem I have with Nurse and Blade. It's less in my hands and more on them screwing the pooch, which never feels particularly good. However, I do enjoy going against him. I think he can be a lot of fun to loop, and even if I'm injured during the chase, I can still extend it for long enough, but you know, I understand why people find that so annoying. So, I want to know what you guys think. If you play Kaneki, was it because any of the reasons that I mentioned? If you hate going against him, please let me know why. I'm curious to get some information on it. It's hard to determine exactly people's problems on like Twitter and stuff like that, because it's just like straight up whining without actually explaining their issues and explaining, you know, the counterplay. Because I see a lot of things that people are complaining about, and there is actual counterplay for it, but people don't seem to want to learn. They just want to seem to bitch and moan the entire time. But there are certainly reasons you can have for not liking going against Kaneki very much. So do you hate Kaneki? Do you love Kaneki? Please let me know below. As for right now, that's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.